The night I realized the house no longer remembered me, the porch light flickered like an uncertain heartbeat. Inside the living room was a tide of plastic blocks, open snack bags, and a cartoon singing about friendship in a voice too bright for evening. My father's desk, the old oak one with the pencil grooves, was gone. In its place stood a foam alphabet mat and a chipped toy piano ringing under Lily's palms. Amber's coat draped over my mother's favorite chair like a flag staked in new land. Jake held a game controller the way a man holds court his shoes on the coffee table that used to be polished every Saturday morning. When Amber glanced up and handed me a baby monitor without saying hello, I felt the floor tilt a few degrees beneath my feet. Before I go on, tell me where you're listening from down in the comments. And if you've ever felt your kindness mistaken for permission, tap the like button and share this with someone who knows that ache. Make sure you're subscribed so you won't miss what came next. But to understand why that night mattered, you need to know how it used to be. I grew up in a house where the clock over the stove ran 2 minutes fast because my mother liked the feeling of arriving early to everything that counted. My father knew the distance from the front step to the mailbox in feet, and he could name every bird that landed on the fence. They weren't wealthy, but they gave us a life stitched with care. Library cards, birthday cakes, gas money slid across the counter with a wink. When Dad's heart sputtered 8 years ago and the doctor said early retirement, I shifted the weight without discussion. I set up automatic payments for their utilities. I paid their property tax and their insurance. I labeled pillboxes by day and hour. On Sundays, I brought salmon and sweet potatoes and listened to my father talk about torque and tolerances like the world still needed his hands. I work at Memorial Hospital, the place people enter with fear in their eyes and leave with bandages and plans. Administration isn't glamorous. It's spreadsheets and staffing gaps at 5 a.m. It's 1,000 small decisions that keep nurses breathing and lights on. But it's steady, and it's honest, and it paid for my parents' peace. I drove 20 minutes after most shifts to bring groceries and laugh at my mother's stories about her old students. They were grateful in a way that warmed my bones. They said thank you without embarrassment, and I said of course, like air. When Amber called last October, the leaves were brandy-colored and thin as old paper. She sounded like summer in a place with pools. "We're moving home," she sang, and I pictured airport terminals and a rented SUV packed with impossibly clean duffel bags. I baked a casserole big enough to feed a choir and set the table with the good plates because the story in my head was simple family back together. Sunday dinners, birthday candles, the ordinary music of being close again. The first night was all camera flashes and little hands. Noah built towers and knocked them down with a theatrical gasp. Emma asked if raccoons could be pets if they said please. Lily climbed the sofa like a mountain with frosting on her chin. My mother's smile was the square of sunlight you get on a winter floor, and my father knelt to roll cars across the rug, even though it cost him. Amber talked about school districts and new starts. Jake said he had leads the kind a man says into a glass of beer. I washed the dishes and told myself to ignore the tiny knot in my chest. What started as sweetness soured slowly like fruit left in a warm car. The first babysitting emergency arrived 3 weeks later. "Just a few hours," Amber said, voice bright with apology. "Interview. Jake's got a meeting. Mom's at the doctor with Dad." I left the hospital early, my notes for a budget meeting still warm from the printer. Lily took her clothes off in a burst of freedom and danced. Noah argued about bedtimes like a small lawyer. Emma cried quietly for a butterfly she'd lost under the sofa weeks earlier. Amber and Jake came back 4 hours late, smelling of citrus and wine, their cheeks flushed like people who'd found a happy hour. "You're amazing," Jake declared, the words tossed like confetti while he scrolled his phone. It didn't happen once. Emergencies multiplied and always bloomed on Fridays, or the night a Blockbuster opened, or when a musician I'd seen on their Instagram happened to be in town. When I tried to talk quietly over coffee, Amber stirred her drink as if listening to a distant band. "Family first," she said, almost tender. "Jobs come and go." When I reminded her that my job had paid for Dad's prescriptions and the roof's shingles, her smile crisped at the edges. "So you're keeping score now." I watched the barista wipe the counter in tight circles and felt like the mop water. At home, I shouldered in a different way. The hospital was installing a new patient management system, which is the kind of sentence that sounds dull until you watch one broken digit clog a week of surgeries. I had a chance at a promotion, more responsibility, yes, but also the kind of paycheck that lets a woman sleep. Certification classes met on Saturdays, so of course, an emergency landed on the first one. I rescheduled and told myself that Grace was a renewable resource. Their belongings spread through my parents' house like ivy. The guest room became a carefully staged kingdom of matching comforters and framed quotes about joy. My mother's kitchen, once a map only she could read, turned into a bright plastic landscape built around snacks. I noticed my father's office had shrunk, then vanished. The desk that held our school photos and his tax folders was pushed into a corner of their bedroom, next to an ironing board. "The kids need room to play," he said lightly. But his eyes were tired in the way of an old song. Jake borrowed my car for an hour and returned it the next day on a sigh of fumes, handing me the keys like a favor. When the utility bill spiked 30%, I stared at the statement under the yellow glow of the kitchen light and said nothing because saying something would make me difficult. The phrase, "keep the peace," started showing up like a stamp on every conversation. Keep the peace when the kids broke my mother's smalty mosaic frame. Keep the peace when my father tucked his chest pain into a joke. Keep the peace when my phone lit up at midnight with a text that read, "Can you do morning? We're wiped." The night I saw my father try to help Lily down from the dining chair and stop with his hand on the table, eyes closed, I realized the peace belonged to everybody but him. I offered to hire a sitter. Amber said, "Why waste money when you're around?" I said, "The sitter would be my gift." She said, "Gifts come without conditions." Jake grinned through it all like a man who'd found a vending machine that kept spitting out coins. I practiced a sentence in the car, the one where I say, "I can't do Tuesdays," or "I can't be on call after 10, the one where I ask my mother to stop apologizing for me before I even arrive. The sentence walked up my throat and sat down. On a Wednesday in March, with my board presentation 2 days away and the hospital humming like a beehive. Amber phoned at dusk. The sky was that steel blue shade that makes porch bulbs look softer. "We have amazing news," she said, the words bubbling. "We booked a cruise, the Bahamas, Saturday to next Sunday. 9 days of sleep." She laughed like a bell. "Mom and Dad can't do mornings and nights, so you'll stay over. We'll leave the van." "There's a list on the fridge?" For a moment, I thought the call had dropped. I could hear Lily thumping a beat on the toy piano in the background. Cars passed outside my condo with that wet tire sound the world makes after rain. I told her I had a presentation that could change my career. I said the word impossible like a soft apology. Her voice cooled by 10 degrees. "Nothing is impossible, Fiona. You just don't want to help. You don't even know how hard it is." When I hung up, my hands were shaking in a way I recognized from late-night ICU updates, the kind where you say, "I understand," before you actually do. 10 minutes later, my mother called, her voice wrapped in tissue paper. "It's short notice, I know, but she needs this." "We all do." "Could you try to move your meeting?" I found myself staring at the small dent in my coffee table where I'd dropped a book last summer. My mother waited like the student for a grade. I drove over with a bag of groceries and my father's refill. The porch light held steady this time, a bright coin in the dark. In the kitchen, I placed the milk and the lettuce in their usual places and breathed in that familiar mix of lemon cleaner and slow cooker roast. On the counter sat a folded receipt from the clinic my father uses for his cardiac treatments. I wasn't looking for it. It sat there like a note someone meant to hide. I reached for it because it had his name on the top line and a dollar figure that looked wrong. I didn't read it then. I placed it back where it was, as if touching it too long would mark me. Friday night, Amber called from the living room without turning around. "We'll show you the bedtime routine, but it's basically vibes. Noah likes 2 stories and the blue nightlight. Emma sleeps with the bug jar on her dresser, don't ask, and Lily will try to take off her pajamas. Just let her win. Fewer tears that way." Jake didn't stand. "You can crash in Dad's office," he said, thumbs moving over a controller. "Oh, wait," he smirked. "Playroom now." "Couch is fine." My mother counted forks at the sink like someone preparing for guests they were already late to. My father came in from the hallway rubbing his sternum with the heel of his hand and told me they'd rearranged because it made the kids happy. "What about you?" I asked, but he lifted his shoulders in the kind of shrug men learn from long years at workplaces that smell like oil and heat. I tried again with Amber after dinner in the small slice of quiet that comes when children finally fall into sleep and the house exhales. "I can't do 9 days, I said, keeping my voice as even as the second hand on the wall clock. "I have deadlines and a presentation that could secure the budget for 3 departments. I'm already covering bills here. I need you to hear me." She picked at the polish on her thumbnail and didn't meet my eyes. "You always think money fixes everything. Sometimes people just need people." She stood and kissed my mother's cheek and told my father they should watch a movie. In the glow from the television, I saw the way my parents looked softer when she spoke and older when I did. I made it to the front door before Amber's text came through. The screen lit my palm in cold blue. "If you can't be bothered to help family when we need you, maybe stop coming around so much. The kids get confused when their aunt only shows up when it's convenient." On the porch, the night air smelled like damp leaves and the neighbor's dryer sheets. A moth looped lazily around the light. I stood there with the text burning against my skin keys in my hand and felt something deep and old tilt again inside me, like the house shifting on its foundation when a train goes by a mile away. Through the window, I could see the new playroom where my father's desk used to be color blocks bright as candy under the lamplight. I didn't answer the text. I slid my phone into my coat pocket and walked to the car. The engine turned over with that familiar catch steady as a metronome. My mother would call in the morning, voice wrapped in cotton, asking me to be kind. My father would say, "She has 3 little ones." There would be another emergency, another request I could not meet without hollowing out something I wasn't sure would grow back. At the stop sign at the end of their street, I looked left and right the way he taught me twice. Each direction, breathe, then go. The roads were empty. The only sound was the soft drumming of rain starting up on the windshield. I gripped the wheel, let the wiper sweep once, and realized how quiet it was when I wasn't filling the silence for everyone. Somewhere behind me, a cartoon sang about friendship in a too bright voice, and a toy piano chimed a wrong note. Ahead, the light at the next intersection turned yellow, then red. I waited alone at that empty crossing and felt the kind of stillness that can either comfort you or break you, depending on the story you choose next. I chose nothing at all yet. I let the stillness settle, and I watched the red light glow against the wet pavement. And I understood that the world would keep turning, whether I kept the peace or not. The rain carried me home that night, drumming on the roof as if the sky had opinions of its own. My headlights carved narrow lines through the mist, and I drove slower than usual, not because of the weather, but because silence felt heavier at higher speeds. When I finally turned into my driveway, the porch light was still on a small, loyal circle of gold waiting for me. I sat there a moment longer, letting the engine hum fill the space where a family conversation should have been. Inside, everything was still. My house smelled faintly of paper and cedar, the way it always did after a long week without visitors. I kicked off my shoes by the door and stood there staring at the grocery bag I'd forgotten to unpack. Somewhere between the milk and the apples sat that folded receipt from my father's clinic, the one that had no right to exist. I hadn't meant to bring it home, but I had. It was tucked into my jacket pocket like a truth that refused to be left behind. I placed it on the counter and turned on the kitchen light. The numbers blurred for a second before my eyes adjusted. $500, paid in full. The handwriting at the bottom looked like my mother's. My chest tightened, a slow sinking kind of ache that felt older than anger. I wanted to believe there was a mistake, that the appointment had simply been rescheduled, but deep down I knew better. That single slip of paper told me everything I hadn't wanted to admit. The money I'd sent for my father's treatment, the money I'd worked late hours for, had turned into bedroom furniture for children who weren't mine. The clock above the stove ticked like a reminder of all the years I'd spent keeping time for everyone but myself. I leaned against the counter and exhaled until the light above me flickered once, twice, then steadied again. The kitchen was quiet, except for the rain. When morning came, I was still dressed, my coffee gone cold. The sun slipped between the blinds, thin and gray, like it didn't want to intrude. I called the clinic first. The receptionist confirmed it in a gentle voice. "Yes, Mrs. Hart canceled last week," she said. "Said they'd call back when they were ready to reschedule." I thanked her and hung up before my throat could close. At work, my body went through the motions, while my mind kept looping that same conversation. I checked charts, approved staffing schedules, and smiled through small talk I couldn't remember later. Around lunchtime, I caught my reflection in the restroom mirror, hair slightly unkempt, lipstick-faded eyes carrying too much wakefulness. I pressed my palms to the sink and whispered, "Enough." It wasn't loud, but it was a promise. That evening, I drove to my parents' house. The sky was clear now, that soft blue that comes after a storm, when the air smells faintly of earth and electricity. My father was in his recliner, the news murmuring in the background. My mother was folding laundry neat and precise, as always. "Did you get the new bedroom set?" I asked, keeping my voice calm. Her hands paused mid-fold. Amber thought the kids would sleep better with proper beds. The old cots weren't safe anymore, and the heart treatment. My father didn't look up. "It's just maintenance," he said. "I can wait a month or two. The kids need a sense of stability." I tried to steady my voice. "Dad's stability doesn't come from new furniture. It comes from knowing you'll be there to watch them grow up." That should have broken through. It didn't. He met my eyes with that flat, measured look he used when I was a teenager, the one that ended every argument before it began. "You don't understand because you don't have children," he said. The sentence hung between us like smoke. My mother's shoulders tensed, as if she'd heard it too many times to defend it anymore. I stood there, gripping the back of a chair, waiting for something that never came. An apology, an explanation, even a sigh of regret. Nothing. So I nodded once and walked out before my voice betrayed me. Driving home, the world outside felt hollow. Porch lights glowed in tidy rows, families sitting down to dinner behind soft curtains. I could almost see them, the clatter of forks, the laughter that comes from people who assume they'll be forgiven. I envied that kind of safety. Days blurred into one another. Work errands, quiet dinners, eaten standing up. My sleep turned shallow dreams filled with unfinished phone calls and voices telling me I was overreacting. Every morning I woke with the same thought, maybe I should just give in, keep the peace like they always asked. But by evening, the idea curdled. Keeping the peace meant losing myself by inches. When my supervisor stopped me after a meeting, her tone was careful. "Fiona, are you all right? You've seemed distracted lately." "I'm fine," I said, but it came out too fast. She gave me a look that said she didn't believe me, and maybe that was the first time I realized I didn't believe me either. A few nights later, I decided to try again with my parents, one last attempt to make them see what was happening. I waited until Amber and Jake were out with the kids. I brought dinner the kind my father used to love before sodium became an enemy. We ate quietly, the air thick with everything unspoken. When the dishes were cleared, I folded my hands on the table. "Mom, Dad," I began. "I need to talk about the way things have changed." My mother's fingers twisted the napkin in her lap, but she didn't interrupt. I told them about the financial strain, the canceled treatments, the exhaustion that clung to all of us. I said I loved Amber and the children, but that love wasn't the same as surrender. "They need to learn to stand on their own," I said softly. "And you deserve to rest." For a heartbeat, I thought I saw something flicker in my mother's eyes. Relief, maybe. Then my father leaned forward. "Amber has children," he said again, his voice firm. "Her needs come first right now. She's raising the next generation of this family." Mom reached across the table and took my hand. "You've always been so strong, Fiona. You can handle things. Amber isn't like you. She's fragile." There it was, the family math that never changed. The strong one gives until empty, the fragile one receives until full. I pulled my hand back gently. "Being capable doesn't mean I don't need care," I said. "And being fragile doesn't excuse taking advantage of people who love you." Neither of them answered. The silence stretched until my father cleared his throat and asked if I'd like more tea, as though the conversation had been about weather. That night, the road home looked different. The same houses, the same streetlights, but everything felt smaller, as if the world had quietly folded in on itself. I parked in my driveway, turned off the engine, and let the quiet wash over me. The windshield reflected my own face, pale and tired. Behind it, the dark sky showed no stars. 3 days later, I stood in the hospital boardroom giving my presentation. The room smelled of coffee and anticipation. I had memorized every line, every figure, but halfway through my thoughts drifted to the sound of my father saying those same 6 words. "You don't understand because you don't have children." It echoed under my ribcage until I almost lost my place. When the meeting ended, the board members clapped politely. My supervisor gave me a small nod of approval, but I could see the question in her eyes. Where had my spark gone? That evening, my phone buzzed with a message from my mother. "Family dinner, Friday. Amber's birthday. Please come." I hesitated, thumb hovering over the screen. Part of me wanted to decline. Another part, the obedient part, couldn't resist the pull of habit. I wrote, "I'll be there," then set the phone face down, as though that might quiet the noise inside me. Friday came heavy with humidity. I stopped for a cake on the way, something simple and polite. When I arrived, the house was alive with voices. Balloons hung crookedly from the ceiling, and the smell of fried chicken filled the air. I handed my mother the cake and tried to steady my breathing. Amber was radiant, flushed with excitement. Jake stood beside her, grinning like a man with a secret. After dinner, she tapped her glass with a fork, the sound slicing through conversation. "We have an announcement," she said, eyes bright. "Remember that cruise? We decided to extend it. 3 weeks in Europe. Paris, Rome, Barcelona. We leave next Saturday." Cheers filled the room, my parents clapping, as if they were sending royalty across the sea. I stood there, a paper plate in one hand, my pulse steady but slow. Then Jake turned to me. "So, Fiona, you'll be moving in while we're gone, right? 3 kids, 21 days. We're counting on you." The words fell like stones into a pond. No one spoke for a heartbeat. Then I heard the hum of the refrigerator and the faint laughter of the children down the hall. Something in me shifted. Not snapped, just shifted like a lock finally turning. I set my plate on the counter, wiped my hands on a napkin, and faced them. "No," I said quietly. "I won't be providing childcare while you take a luxury vacation you can't afford. My job and my life matter too. You'll need to make other arrangements." For a moment, I thought the ceiling itself might crack from the silence. Amber's face twisted first with confusion, then with fury. My mother started to cry softly. My father's jaw tightened. Jake stepped closer, his voice rising. "What kind of person refuses to help family? The kind who's finally learned what help means," I said. "It isn't servitude." Amber called me selfish. "My father warned me not to cause stress for him or for Mom." Jake muttered something about ungrateful daughters and stomped into the kitchen. I stood there, hands trembling, but voice calm. "I love all of you," I said. "But this isn't love anymore. This is taking." I picked up my purse, walked out, and didn't look back. In the car, I sat with my hands on the steering wheel, waiting for the tears that didn't come. The house behind me glowed warm in the rearview mirror. Laughter spilling out of windows, a picture of family that wasn't mine anymore. The rain started again, soft at first, then steadier, tracing quiet rivers down the glass. For the first time in months, the sound didn't feel heavy. It sounded like the world exhaling, making space for something new. I didn't know what that new thing would be. Only that it would start with the word no. And that for the first time in years, the word felt like peace. The rain had stopped by the time I reached home, leaving the streetlights reflected in shallow puddles across the driveway. When I stepped inside, the air felt still, the kind of silence that hums in your ears after too much noise. My phone blinked with missed calls, messages stacked one after another. Amber, my mother, then Jake. I didn't open any of them. I poured a glass of water and stood at the window, watching the droplets trail down the glass. Somewhere inside me, a quiet broke open. Not rage or grief, just an emptiness that had been waiting to breathe. The next morning, I called in a personal day. I told my assistant I needed to take care of some things at home. What I really needed was a moment to think, without someone tugging at me for answers. I spent the morning on the porch with a notebook and a pen, making a list of everything I'd been holding together: utilities insurance, medical payments, property taxes, endless reminders for prescriptions. Every number on that page was a thread tied to me. When I reached the total, I stared at it until the ink blurred. $78,000. 8 years of quiet giving. I set the pen down and folded my hands over the notebook like someone closing a prayer. The sound of a lawnmower started up a few houses down, steady and low. Ordinary life carried on as if mine hadn't just split in two. Later that week, I sat across from my therapist, Dr. Marshall. She was a calm woman with soft gray hair and hands that never hurried. I told her everything: the dinner, the shouting, the silence that followed. She listened without flinching. When I finished, she leaned forward slightly, elbows resting on her knees. "You've been the caretaker," she said gently. "They've built their stability on your predictability. And now that you've said no, the whole system is shaking." I nodded, a lump forming in my throat. I don't know how to stop helping without feeling cruel. "Boundaries aren't cruelty, Fiona," she said. "They're clarity. And clarity can feel harsh to people who've benefited from confusion." The words settled in the room like something solid. That night, I began taking them apart piece by piece, Automatic payments, shared addresses, every quiet agreement that had become a chain. I opened my laptop and sent the first email to my bank, then the next to the insurance company. My hands trembled, but I didn't stop. When I finally closed the lid, the clock read 1:12 a.m. The house was dark except for the faint glow from the streetlight through the curtains. I sat there for a long time, feeling the quiet shift from fear to calm. 3 days later, the storm began. Amber left 7 voicemails before noon. Each one louder, faster, her voice unraveling. "The electricity's off, Fiona. Do you even care? Then you can't just walk away? What kind of sister are you?" The last one came as a text. Mom's crying. Dad's furious. "You've destroyed everything." I turned the phone face down on the counter. My hands shook for a moment, then stilled. I made tea the same brand my mother liked and let it steep until it went cold. By evening, I was back at work immersed in reports, trying to keep my mind on staffing schedules instead of the guilt pounding behind my ribs. When security called to say a man was in the lobby asking for me, my first thought was Jake. He was waiting near the reception desk, shoulders squared, anger hanging off him like a heavy coat. "You think you can just cut everyone off?" he demanded, voice carrying through the marble hallway. Heads turned. My stomach dropped, but I stood my ground. "Jake, this is my workplace. Lower your voice." He stepped closer, too close. "Your parents are scared they'll lose the house because of you. You've turned your back on your own family. I've stopped paying for adults who refuse to work," I said quietly. His face twisted. "You'll regret this. When your parents lose everything, it'll be on you." Security appeared behind him, calm and professional. "Sir, we need you to leave." Jake's finger jabbed toward me. "You're heartless, Fiona. Family doesn't quit." "I didn't quit," I said softly. "I just stopped being used." They escorted him out while my director watched from her doorway. Later, she suggested filing a restraining order. I nodded, but didn't answer. The thought of involving police in something so intimate felt unbearable, even if it was the logical thing to do. That night, I left work long after sunset. The hospital's parking lot was nearly empty, the air cool with the smell of rain. As I drove home, my mother's name flashed across the screen. Against my better judgment, I answered. Her voice was small-tired. "Fiona, our service has been disconnected. The water might be next. Amber says they can't help, they've already paid for their trip. We don't know what to do." The guilt she knew how to wield so well slid easily into the space between us. I took a breath. Mom-Dad's pension and Social Security should cover utilities. If you need help with a budget, I can recommend a counselor. But I can't resume payments. Her breath hitched. "Is that all you have to say? A referral? Your father is disappointed. I thought we raised you better than this." The line went quiet. I looked out at the highway lights stretching ahead like a string of small, unreachable suns. "I know you did," I said softly. "But I'm not that child anymore." When I hung up, the ache in my chest wasn't guilt anymore. It was grief, plain and clean. 2 days later, I invited my parents to meet at a cafe halfway between our homes. I wanted one last chance to reach them without the noise of everyone else. They arrived together, my mother clutching her purse like a lifeline, my father's face drawn and pale. We ordered coffee, though none of us touched it. I explained again gently that I wasn't abandoning them, that I'd made sure their essentials were covered and left an emergency fund for medical care. I asked them to talk to Amber and Jake to insist on shared responsibility. For a moment, I thought they were listening. Then my father's expression changed. "You've embarrassed this family," he said quietly. "Amber tells people you've gone cold. Is that true?" I swallowed hard. "No, Dad. I've gone sane." My mother's hand shook as she reached for his. You've always been the strong one, Fiona. Don't make this harder than it already is. I wanted to say that strength had never been a gift. It was a sentence. But instead, I said, I'm not coming back to the house, Mom. Not until things change. She nodded, without meeting my eyes. The next afternoon, Amber and Jake showed up at that same cafe. My parents had told them where we were meeting. I saw them before they saw me. Amber in bright colors, Jake already smirking. They came straight to my table, voices raised enough for everyone to hear. You need therapy, Jake said. You've lost your mind. Amber cried loudly, her tears falling in practiced intervals. You've broken Mom's heart. You're punishing us for having a family. The manager approached, asking them to lower their voices. I stood, placed a few dollars under my untouched cup, and walked out. Their voices followed me onto the sidewalk, fading with each step. By the time I reached my car, my hands had stopped shaking. The sadness was still there, but quieter now, shaped into something steadier. I knew then that I wasn't going back, not to the house, not to that version of myself that mistook endurance for love. In the days that followed, I packed a small suitcase, took a week of vacation, and drove north to a town 25 miles away. I found a furnished apartment above a bakery, the kind that smelled of sugar in the mornings and cinnamon by noon. I signed a short lease and moved a few essentials clothes books, a framed photo of my parents from better years. The first night there, I lay on the couch listening to the sound of footsteps on the sidewalk below. No one knew where I was. For the first time in years, I slept through the night. In the mornings, I walked to a small park nearby, bought coffee from a street cart, and sat watching the light spread across the grass. I called the hospital only once to check in with my team. Everything was fine without me. The thought surprised me, but it also brought relief. I wrote letters that week one to my parents, explaining my decisions in clear, kind terms. Another to myself, promising that I wouldn't return to the person who said yes out of fear. The third letter went to Dr. Marshall, thanking her for giving me words to replace guilt. I mailed the first two and kept the third tucked into a book on my nightstand. By the weekend, the messages from home had slowed to a trickle. The silence felt strange, almost too wide, but it was peace all the same. I began filling it with new sounds music. I'd stopped listening to the rustle of newspapers, the creak of the floorboards under my steps. When the phone finally rang again, I didn't recognize the number. It was a neighbor from my parents' street. I thought you should know, she said gently. They're doing all right. Amber and Jake left for that trip after all. I thanked her, hung up, and looked out the window. The sky was pale blue, a thin veil of clouds moving east. Somewhere across miles of ocean and good intentions gone wrong, my sister was sipping wine on a cruise deck. My parents were home, maybe realizing how quiet the house felt without me filling every gap. I didn't wish them harm. I just wished them understanding. And if that understanding had to come through absence, then so be it. That night, I unpacked the last box. The photo of my parents went on the small bookshelf near the window. I didn't look at it long. I simply nodded once, a quiet farewell. Then I opened the window to the sound of distant church bells, the scent of baked bread drifting up from below. The air felt new. So did I. I didn't know if the next call would bring peace or more pleading. But for the first time, I wasn't waiting for it. Spring came quietly, almost as if the earth itself was cautious not to wake what had finally found rest. From my apartment above the bakery, the mornings smelled of sugar and rain. I'd grown used to that rhythm, the whir of the mixers downstairs, the low murmur of customers waiting for coffee. It was a small soundscape of ordinary peace, and I clung to it. Most days began the same way. I'd walk to the park before work, coffee in hand, watching the city stretch awake. A year ago, those quiet minutes would have felt like wasted time. Now they felt like breathing. I'd started volunteering at the local literacy center on Sundays, helping older adults prepare for exams or write their first emails to grandchildren. It was humbling listening to their stories, how each person carried an invisible history, yet still showed up to try again. It reminded me that healing isn't about forgetting. It's about returning to yourself slowly, kindly. But life doesn't stay untouched for long. One afternoon in April, as I turned down the produce aisle at the grocery store, I froze. My mother stood near the apples, thinner than I remembered, her hair pulled back with the same clip she'd worn for years. For a heartbeat, I considered slipping away unnoticed, but she turned at that exact moment. Our eyes met, and something in her expression softened before she even spoke. "Fiona," she said quietly. Her voice was smaller, rougher. "Hi, Mom." We stood there, surrounded by the smell of fruit and the hum of fluorescent lights. Neither of us reached for the other right away. It was awkward at first, the way people move around something fragile, afraid of breaking it. Finally, I nodded toward the small cafe tucked in the corner of the store. "Do you want to sit for a bit?" She nodded almost with relief. We ordered 2 coffees and found a table near the window. For a while, we just sat in silence, stirring cream that didn't need stirring. She told me Amber and Jake had moved out in February, renting a small house near his new job. The children were in school now, adjusting well. My father's health, she said, was stable again, though he tired easily. I listened without interrupting, letting her words build a picture of a life that had kept moving without me. When she looked up, her eyes were damp. "We made mistakes," she said softly. "Your father and I. We didn't want to lose either of our daughters, but we weren't fair to you." I pressed my hand around the warm cup. "I know you love me, Mom. That was never the question." She gave a small, shaky smile. Would you visit sometime? Maybe dinner." Nothing big. I didn't promise. I only said, "Let's start like this. Coffee once in a while." We both knew it was more than enough for now. 2 weeks later, a letter arrived at my apartment addressed in my father's careful handwriting. The envelope was plain, but the moment I saw his name, my heart began to race. I sat on the couch, turning it over before finally breaking the seal. His message was short, typical of him. He wrote that he still didn't fully understand my decisions, but that he respected them. He admitted they had depended on me far too long, that Amber and Jake were finally learning to manage on their own. Then came a quiet request. Some of his medical bills had grown beyond what their fixed income could handle. "If you are willing to assist with these specific costs," he wrote, "we would be grateful." There was no guilt in his tone, no expectation hidden between the lines. Just honesty. I read it twice before setting it down. The part of me that had once leapt to help stayed still this time, waiting for reason to catch up. That night, I talked it over with Dr. Marshall. We sat in her softly lit office while she listened to me read the letter aloud. "It sounds like he's trying," she said. "I think so," I replied. "And I want to help, but differently." She nodded. "Then help in a way that protects you. Boundaries aren't barriers, they're pathways." So I wrote him back. I agreed to cover his medical treatments, but only those. Everything else, utilities, groceries, household expenses, was theirs to manage. I explained it simply without apology, then mailed the letter with a calm I hadn't felt in years. Weeks passed. My parents kept their word. The payments went directly to the clinic, handled discreetly by my father's doctor, who kindly kept my involvement private. Knowing he was getting proper care gave me quiet relief, even if I still couldn't bring myself to visit. Summer folded in on itself, heavy with long days and softer evenings. One Sunday in June, I heard a knock on my apartment door. It was just past sunset, the air thick with the smell of baked bread from downstairs. When I opened the door, my heart stopped for a moment. My father stood there. He looked older, yes, but not frail. His eyes met mine with a steadiness I hadn't seen since before everything broke apart. He cleared his throat, a small habit that used to precede every difficult conversation. "I was nearby," he said. "Thought I'd try my luck." I stepped aside to let him in. The space was small, but he took it in quietly, hands clasped behind his back. "Smells good," he said. "The bakery downstairs," I replied. "They start early." He nodded, then sat at the small table by the window. For a while, we just listened to the faint sound of someone locking up below. "I got your letter," he said finally. "Thank you for helping with the treatments. I didn't expect it not after what we said." I leaned against the counter. "I didn't do it to fix things, Dad. I did it because it's right." He looked down at his hands. "I think I understand that now." The next words came slower, heavier. "We leaned on you too hard, Fiona. Expected too much. When you stepped away, we had to face things we should have faced long ago. It wasn't easy, but maybe it needed to happen." For a moment, I saw the man who used to build our backyard fence by hand, who taught me to check twice before crossing the road. I'd missed that version of him, the one who spoke with reason instead of fear. He sighed and stood. "Your mother's making roast next Sunday. Nothing fancy. You're welcome if you'd like." I smiled faintly. "I'll think about it." He smiled back. "That's all I ask." When he left, the apartment felt strangely full, as if the air itself carried something lighter. That week, I found myself humming while watering the plants, a small habit I'd picked up from my mother. The rhythm felt comforting instead of painful. In July, I received another small surprise. My youngest niece, Lily, sent a voice recording through my mother's phone, a simple happy birthday, Aunt Fiona, followed by a burst of giggles and an off-key song. The sweetness of it melted something I thought had hardened for good. I replayed it twice before saving it to my phone. After a few days of thought, I reached out to my parents. "If the kids want to see me," I said, "maybe we could meet at the park near your house. Just the children, and you two." They agreed without hesitation. That Saturday, the summer sun was gentle enough for a long afternoon. The park smelled of cut grass and distant barbecue smoke. When I arrived, the children were already chasing bubbles across the playground. Noah had grown taller. Emma carried a magnifying glass intent on studying every beetle that crossed her path. And Lily, sweet, fearless. Lily ran toward me the moment she saw me, her small arms wrapping around my knees. "Aunt Fiona," she squealed, her hair brushing my hands. For the first time in years, I felt laughter rise in my chest without effort. We spent hours there watching the light shift across the trees. My parents sat on a nearby bench sharing a thermos of coffee, quiet and content. It wasn't perfect. Some wounds never close neatly, but it was enough. Enough to start again without rewriting the past. By late afternoon, as the shadows lengthened, my father called out that it was time to go. The children waved goodbye, their pockets filled with pebbles and small treasures. My mother lingered for a moment, touching my arm gently. "Thank you for coming," she whispered. I nodded, words caught somewhere behind my smile. As they walked away, I stayed a few minutes longer, watching the empty swings move softly in the breeze. There was peace in that motion, something steady, rhythmic, like forgiveness, finding its place. When I drove home that evening, the sunset painted the road in shades of gold and violet. I realized somewhere between the turn onto Maple and the slow climb up to my street that I wasn't waiting for reconciliation anymore. I already had it in small, imperfect pieces, the kind that come quietly and stay. The apartment welcomed me with its familiar warmth. I poured a glass of water and sat by the window, the same spot where months earlier I'd read my father's letter with shaking hands. Now I looked out at the lights below and smiled. The world outside was unchanged, cars moving, laughter from the bakery, a dog barking 2 buildings over. But inside, something had settled into balance. I didn't know what the future held for my family, or whether the calm would last. But as the last light faded across the glass, I knew this much peace, when it finally arrives, doesn't announce itself with thunder. It slips in like evening air through a half-open window, steady and quiet, asking nothing but to be noticed. Morning sunlight moved through the thin curtains like honey, warm and slow, touching the walls of my apartment with a softness that felt almost deliberate. I'd been awake for a while, watching the light crawl across the floorboards, thinking about how different silence felt these days. It wasn't the heavy kind that filled the house after an argument. It was lighter, open, like the pause between breaths. The bakery downstairs had already begun its day. The smell of bread floated upward, mingling with the faint hum of early traffic. I poured coffee and opened the window. A sparrow perched on the railing, tilting its head at me before darting away. Small things like that had started to matter again, the sounds, the pauses, the slow unfolding of morning. Over the months, I had fallen into a rhythm. Work was steady, meaningful. The new department I led at the hospital had become something of a family itself. People who worked hard, laughed often, and left the office lighter than when they arrived. I'd stopped staying late, though. I'd learned that peace couldn't live in exhaustion. Most evenings I walked to the park. Sometimes I brought my camera, sometimes just an apple and a book. One evening, in early autumn, I saw Amber there. She was sitting on a bench with Lily asleep across her lap, the older 2 playing on the swings. The air smelled faintly of pine and the first chill of fall. For a moment, I stood back watching. Amber looked up and saw me. There was no awkwardness in her face this time, just recognition. A small, tired smile that said more than words could manage. I walked over and sat beside her. "Hey," she said softly. "Hey." We sat quietly, listening to the squeak of the swings and the distant rush of a passing train. When Lily stirred, Amber brushed a hand over her daughter's hair. "She still asks about you," she said, "about the stories you used to tell her." I smiled. "I'll have to tell her a new one next time." Amber nodded, her eyes following her children. "We've been doing better," she said after a moment. "Jake's working full-time now. I started some online classes in early childhood education. It's not easy, but it's ours." The word ours hung gently between us. I could feel the sincerity in it, the quiet pride of someone learning to stand on her own. I reached for my thermos and handed it to her. "Coffee." She laughed softly. "You still take it black. Some things don't change. We didn't rehash the past or apologize for every wound. Some things didn't need to be spoken aloud to be understood." When the kids came running back, cheeks red and hands sticky from a shared popsicle, I helped Amber pack up their things. Before she left, she turned to me and said, "Maybe we could do this again. The park or lunch? No big plans." "That sounds good," I said. And it did. A week later, I received a short text from my mother. "Sunday dinner at 6. Just us. No surprises." The message made me smile. It felt like her way of saying, "We'll behave." I decided to go. When I pulled into the driveway, the house looked different. The yard was trimmed, the porch newly painted, but it wasn't the surface changes that struck me. It was the quiet, the kind that comes from people learning to coexist without performance. My father met me at the door. His steps were slower, but his smile was steady. "Good to see you, sweetheart," he said, opening the door wider. Inside, the house smelled of roasted chicken and rosemary. My mother was setting the table, humming under her breath. She looked up, her eyes bright but calm. "You made it," she said, not as a question, but as a welcome. Dinner was simple, just the three of us. We talked about small things, the garden, the weather, the new couple who had moved next door. My father asked about the hospital, my mother about the bakery below my apartment. The conversation drifted easily, like a familiar melody played softly enough to remember why you liked it. Afterward, my father poured tea, and we sat in the living room. The walls still held the same family photos, but there were new ones too, pictures of the grandchildren, Amber and Jake, smiling in front of a modest little house. "I never thought peace could feel like this," my mother said quietly, setting her cup down. "Simple." I looked around, then back at her. "Sometimes simple is the hardest thing to earn." My father nodded, his gaze thoughtful. "We made it harder than it had to be, but we're learning." He paused, then added, "You were right to step away. I see that now." It was the kind of acknowledgement that didn't need embellishment. I just smiled and said, "I'm glad." When I left that night, the air outside was crisp, filled with the hum of crickets. My father walked me to the car, hands in his jacket pockets. "Drive safe," he said, then hesitated. "You know the kids are planning a small gathering for Thanksgiving. Nothing fancy. You'd be welcome." I rested my hand on the car door. "We'll see," I said, and he smiled in that way that meant he understood it wasn't rejection, just honesty. The weeks that followed were gentler. Small messages from my mother, photos of the children, sent now and then, tiny threads of connection rebuilt slowly one at a time. I kept my boundaries firm, but open enough for light to pass through. And in that balance, I found peace. At work, I started mentoring younger staff people who reminded me of my younger self, all ambition and no rest. One afternoon, after a long meeting, a nurse stopped by my office. "You're calmer than most people here," she said with a smile. "How do you do it?" I thought for a moment before answering. "I stopped confusing sacrifice with love," I said. "Once you learn the difference, the rest falls into place." She nodded like she understood, though maybe she wouldn't not yet. It takes time to learn peace. By winter, I'd furnished my apartment the way I'd always wanted, nothing extravagant, just pieces that felt like home. A soft armchair near the window, new curtains in pale blue, a framed photo of my parents and me from years ago. It didn't erase the past, but it made it livable. Sometimes, on Sunday mornings, I drove to my parents' neighborhood and parked near the old trail behind their house. I'd walk the path to where the creek curved and the trees met overhead. The air there was always cooler, the light dappled and forgiving. I'd sit on the same bench my father built decades ago, running my fingers along the rough grain of the wood. It had weathered storms too, but it still stood. One day, as I sat there, I heard laughter coming from farther down the trail, Amber and her children exploring. Lily spotted me first, waving so hard she nearly toppled over. "Aunt Fiona." I waved back, smiling as they made their way toward me. Amber looked surprised, but happy to see me. "We didn't think you'd be here," she said. "Just visiting an old spot," I said. "Want to join me?" We sat together on the bench, the kids tossing stones into the creek. The late afternoon sun flickered through the branches, scattering light over the water. It was peaceful, the kind of peace that doesn't ask for perfection, just presence. As they left, Amber squeezed my shoulder lightly. "Thanks for staying," she said. "Always," I answered, and I meant it. That evening, back at my apartment, I watched dusk settle through the windows. the city lights flickering on, one by one, against the fading sky. I thought about everything that had changed and everything that hadn't. I wasn't the same woman who once tried to hold an entire family together by herself. I didn't need to be. The strength I carried now was quieter, steadier, rooted in choice. Peace, I realized, wasn't something anyone gives you. It's what you decide to keep even when others don't understand why. If this story spoke to you, tell me where you're listening from. I'd love to know. And if you've ever learned that peace can be its own kind of victory, share this with someone who needs that reminder. Don't forget to subscribe for more stories about quiet strength healing and second chances. Good night, and may you find your own stillness waiting for you just beyond the noise.